Welcome, everyone. Now, let's get back to this beautiful book of terror. Chapter 5. A Great Storm. Now, as I said, we came at last to safety in the open sea, and so for a time I had some degree of peace. Though it was long ere we threw off all of the terror which the land of lonesomeness had cast over our hearts. And what more matter there is regarding that land, which my memory recalls. It is being remembered that George found certain wrappers upon which there was writing. Now, in the haste of our leaving, he had given no thought to take with him, yet a portion of one he found within the side pocket of his jacket, and it ran somewhat thus. "By I hear my lover's voice wailing in the night, and I go find him, for my loneliness is not to be borne. May God have mercy upon me." And that was all. For a day and night we stood out of the land out of the north, having steady breeze to which set our larboard sails, and so made very good way, the sea being quiet, though being with a slow, lumbering swell from southward. It was on the morning of the second day of our escape that we met with the beginnings of our venture into the silent sea, the which I'm about to make clear as I'm able. The night had been quiet, and the breeze steady until near the dawn, when the wind slacked away to nothing, and we lay there, waiting. Perchance the sun would bring a breeze with it, and this it did. But no such wind as we desired, for the morning came upon us as we discovered part of the sky to be full of firing redness, which presently spread down to the south, so that an entire quarter of the heaven was, as it seemed to us, a mighty arc of blood-colored fire. The night had been quiet, and the breeze steady and... Now, within the sight of the omens, the boatswain gave orders to prepare the boats for the storm which had reason to suspect. Look for it in the south, for it was from that direction the swell came rolling upon us. With this intent, we roused out so much heavy canvas as the boats contained, for we had gotten a bolt and a half from the bog in the creek. Also, the boat cover which we lashed down to the brass studs under the gunnels of the boat. Then in each boat we mounted the whaleback, which had been stowed along the tops of the thwarts. Also its supports, lashing some to the thwarts below the knees. Then we laid 2 lengths of the stout canvas the full length of the boat over the whaleback, overlapping and nailing them to the same. So they sloped away over the gunnels upon each side as though they formed a roof to us. Here, whilst some of the canvas stretched the canvas, nailing its lower edges to the gunnels, others were employed in lashing together the oars and masts, and to this they secured the considerable length of a new 3.5-inch hemp rope, which they had brought away from the hulk along with the canvas, The rope then passed over the bows and through the painter ring, and thence the forward thwarts, there, where it was made fast, and we gave attention to parcel it with odd strips of canvas against the danger of the chafe. And there was the same done with both the boats. But we could not put our trust in the painters, beside which they had not sufficient length to secure safe and easy riding. By this time, we had canvas nailed down and the gunwales around our boat, which we had spread the boat cover over it, lacing it down to the brass studs beneath the gunwale. And so we had all the boat covered in, save a place on the stern where a man might stand to wield the steering oar. For the boats were double-bowed, and each boat we made some preparation, lashing all movable objects and preparing to meet so great a storm as it might fill the heart with terror. For the sky cried to us, and would be no light wind, and further, the great swell from the south grew more huge with every hour that passed, though as yet it was without virulence, being slow and oily and black against the redness of the sky. Presently we were ready and had cast over the bundle of oars in the mast, which was to serve as our sea anchor, and so we lay waiting. As by this time the boatswain called over to Josh certain advice with regard to the which lay before us, and out of that 2 men scuttled the boats a little apart, for there might be the danger of their being dashed together for the first violence of the storm. And so came a time of waiting, with Josh and the boatswain, each of them at the steering oars, and the rest of us stowed under the coverings. From where I crouched near the boatswain, I had sighted Josh a well. Upon the port side, he was standing back up as the shape of the night against the mighty redness. When the boat came to the foamless crowns of the swells, and then gone from sight into the hollows between. Now midday had come and gone, and we made shift to eat so good as a meal as our appetites would allow, for we had no knowledge how long it might be ere we should have a chance of another, if, indeed, we had ever need to think of such. Then, in the part of the afternoon, we heard the first cryings of the storm, a far distant moaning, rising and falling so solemnly. Presently, all the south part of the horizon so high up, maybe as the 7 to 10 degrees, was blotted out by a great black wall of cloud, over which red glare came down upon such great swells as though to form some light of some vast and unforeseen fire. It was by this time the sun had the appearance of a great full moon, being pale and clearly defined, and seeming to have no warmth nor brilliancy, and this, as may be imagined, seemed most strange to us, the more so because of the redness in the south and east. And all this while the swells increased most prodigiously, though without making broken water, yet they informed us that we had done well to make such precaution, for surely they were raised by a very great storm. A little before evening, the moaning came again, and then in a space of silence, after which there rose a very sudden bellowing, as of wild beasts, and then, once more, the silence. About this time, the boatswain making no objection, I raised my head above the cover until I was in a standing position, for, until now, I had taken no more than occasional peep, and I was very glad of the chance to stretch my limbs, for I had grown mightily cramped, having stirred the sluggishness of my blood, sat me down again, put in such a position as I could see every part of the horizon without difficulty. That of us. This is to the south. I saw now a great wall of cloud that risen some further degrees, and there was something less of the redness. Oh, indeed, what there was left was sufficiently terrifying, for it appeared to pierce the black cloud like red foam, seeming it might be as though a mighty sea made ready to break over the world. Towards the west, where the sun was sinking beneath a curious red-tipped haze, to give it the appearance of a dull red disk. To the north, seeming very high in the sky, were some flecks of cloud laying motionless, and of a very pretty rose color. And here I may remark that all the sea to the north of us appeared to be as a very ocean of dull red fire. Oh, as might be expected, the swells coming up from the south against the light were so many exceeding great hills of blackness. It was just after I had made these observations that we heard again the distant roaring of the storm. I know not how to convey the exceeding terror of that sound. It was though some mighty beast growled far down towards the south, and it seemed to make very clear to me that but two small craft in a very lonesome place. Then, even while the roaring lasted, I saw sudden light flare up, as if it were from the edge of the southern horizon. It had somewhat the appearance of lightning, yet vanished not immediately as molten lightning, and more, it had not been my experience to witness such spring up out of the sea, but rather down from the heavens. Yet I have little doubt but that it was form of lightning, for it came many times after this, so that I had chance to observe it minutely, and frequently as I watched, the storm would shout out at us in the most fearsome manner. Then, when the sun was low upon the horizon, there came to our ears a very shrill, screaming noise, most penetrating and distressing. Immediately afterwards, the boatswain shouted something in a hoarse voice, and commenced to sway furiously upon the steering oar. I saw his stare fixed upon a point on our larboard side, and perceived that in the direction the sea was all blown up into a vast cloud of dust like froth, and I knew that the storm was upon us. Immediately afterwards, a cold blast struck us, but we suffered no harm, for the boatswain had gotten the boat on bows on by this. The wind passed us, and there was an instant of calm. And now, all the air above us was full of a continuous roaring, so very loud and intense it was like to be deafened. To windward, I perceived an enormous wall of spray bang down upon us, and I heard again the shrill screaming pierced through the roaring, and then the boatswain whipped in his oar under the cover, and reaching forward drew the canvas aft, so that it covered the entire boat, and he held it down against the gunwale on the starboard side, shouting in my ear to do likewise upon the larboard. Now, had it not been for this forethought on the part of the boatswain, we had been all dead men, and this may be better delivered when I explain that we felt the water falling upon the stout canvas overhead, tons and tons, so beaten to froth as to lack solidity to sink or crush us. I have said felt, for I would make it clear as may be, here and once for all, that so intense was the roaring and screaming of the elements that there could be no sound to have penetrated to us. No, not the pealing of mighty thunders, and so for the space of maybe a full minute the boat quivered and shook most vilely. And so she seemed like to have been shaken into pieces, and from a dozen places between the gunwale and the covering canvas, the water spurted in upon us. And here, one other thing I would like to make mention of. During that minute, the boat had ceased to rise and fall upon the great swell, and whether this was because the sea was flattened by the first rush of wind, or that the excess of the storm held her steady, I am unable to tell, and I can put down only which we felt. Now, in a little, the first flurry of the blast being spent, the boat began to sway side to side, as though the wind blew now upon one beam, and now upon the other, and several times we were stricken heavily with blows of solid water. But presently this ceased, and we returned once again to the rise and fall of the swell. Only that now we received a cruel jerk every time that the boat came upon the top of the sea, and so a while passed. Towards midnight, as I should judge, there came a mighty flames of lightning, so bright that it lit up the boat through the double covering of canvas. Yet no man of us heard aught of the thunder, for the roaring of the storm made all else silence. And so, to the dawn, after which, finding that we're still by the mercy of God possessed our lives, we made shift to eat and drink, after which we slept. Now being extremely wearied by the stress of the past night, I slumbered through many hours of the storm, waking at some time between noon and evening. Overhead, as I lay looking upwards, the canvas showed the dull, leaden color, blackened completely by the wiles of the dash of spray and water. And so presently, having eaten again, and feeling that all things lay in the hands of the Almighty, I came once again upon more sleep. Twice through the following night I was wakened by the boat being hurled upon her beam ends by the blows of the sea, but she righted easily and took scarce any water, the canvas proving to be very roof of safety. And so the morning came again. Being now rested, I crawled after where the bosun lay, and the noise of the storm lulling odd instants shouted to his ear whether the wind was easing at whiles. To this he nodded, whereat I felt most joyful sense of the hoping pulse through me, and ate such food as could be gotten, with a very good relish. In the afternoon the sun broke out suddenly, lighting up the boat most gloomily through the wet canvas. Yet a very welcome light it was, and bred in us hope that the storm was near to breaking. In a little the sun disappeared, but presently it's coming again. The bosun beckoned me to assist him, and we removed such temporary nails that we had used to fasten down the after part of the canvas, and pushed back the covering a space sufficient to allow our heads to go through into the daylight. On looking out, I discovered the air to be full of spray, beaten as fine as dust, and then before I can get to note aught else, a little gout of water took me in the face, with such a force to deprive me of breath. and so I had to descend beneath the canvas for a little while. Soon as I recovered, I thus forced my head again, and now had some sight of the terrors around us. As each huge sea came towards us, the boat shot up to meet it, right up to its very crest, and there, for the space of some instants, we could seem to be swamped in a very ocean of foam, welling up on each side of the boat, to a height of many feet. Then, the sea passing from under us, we would go swooping dizzily down the great black froth splotched up the wave, until the oncoming sea caught us up most mightily. Odd whiles the crest of the sea would hurl forward before we had reached the top, and through the boat shot upward like a veritable feather, and the water would swirl right over us, and we would have to draw in our heads most suddenly, and in such cases the wind flapping the cover down as soon as our hands were removed. And a part of the way in which the boat met the seas, for there was a very sense of terror in the air, and continuous roaring and howling of the storm, and the screaming of the foam, as the frothy summits of the heavy, briny mountains hurled past us in the wind that tore the breath out of your weak human throats, and things scarce to be conceived. Presently we drew on our heads, the sun having vanished again, and nailed down the canvas once more, and so prepared for the night. From here on until the morning, I had very little knowledge of any happenings, for I slept as much as the time, and for the rest, there was little to know cooped up beneath the cover, nothing save for the inimitable thundering swoop of the boat downwards, then the halt and her upward hurl, and the occasional plunges and surges to larboard or starboard, occasioned, I can almost suppose, by the indiscriminate might of the seas. I would make mention here how I had little thought of all this while for the pearl of the other boat, and indeed I was so very full of her own, it is no matter to which wonder. However, as it proved, and as this is a most suitable place in which to tell it, the boat that held Josh and the rest of the crew came through the storm with safety. Though it was not until many years afterwards that I could fortunately hear from Josh himself how that, after the storm, they were picked up by a homeward-bound vessel and landed in the port of London. And now, onto our happenings. Chapter 6. The Weed-Choked Sea. It was some little while before midday that we grew conscious that the sea had become very much less violent, and despite the wind roaring with a scarce abated noise, and presently everything about the boat, saving the wind, had grown undoubtedly calmer, and with no great water breaking over the company again to assist and lift the after part of the cover. This we did, and put forth our heads to inquire into the reason of the unexpected quietness of the sea, not knowing but we had come suddenly under the lee of some unknown land, stripped off the cover so far as the midship thwart, for the rest of the men were sorely in need of the fresh air after so long a time below the canvas covering. This was after we had eaten, that one of them made out that there was another low bank astern which we were drifting, and the boatswain stood up and made an examination of it. It being a much exercise in his mind to know how we might come clear of it with safety. Presently, however, we had come so near to it that we discovered it to be composed of seaweed, and so we let the boat drive upon it, making no doubt that the other bags which we had seen were similar in nature. In a little, we have driven in among the weed, yet though our speed was greatly slowed, we made some progress. And so in time we came out the other side, and now we found the sea to be near quiet, so that we hauled in our sea anchor, which had collected a great mass of weed about it, and removed the whaleback and canvas coverings, after which we stepped the mast and set a tiny storm foresail upon the boat, for we wished to have her under control, and could set no more than this because of the violence of the breeze. Thus we drove on before the wind, the bosun steering and avoiding all such banks that showed ahead, and ever the sea grew calmer. Then, when it was on near to the evening, we discovered a huge stretch of the weed that seemed to block all the sea ahead, and that we hauled down the foresail and took to our oars and began to pull broadside onto it towards the west. Yet so strong was the breeze that we were being driven down rapidly upon it, and then, just before sunset, we opened out the end of it and drew on our oars, very thankful to set a little foresail and run off again before the wind. And so presently that night came down upon us, and the bosun made us take turn and turn about to keep a lookout, for the boat was going some knots through the water, and we were among strange seas, but he took no sleep at all that night, keeping always to steering oar. I have memory during my time of watching of passing odd floating masses, which I make no doubt were weed, and once we drove right atop of one, but drew clear without much trouble. And all the while, through the dark to the starboard, I could make out a dim outline of what enormous weed extent laying low upon the sea, and seeming without end. And so presently, my time to watch being at an end, I returned to my slumber, and when next I waked, it was morning. Now the morning discovered to me that there was no end to the weed upon the starboard side, for it stretched away into the distance ahead of us so far as we could see. Well, all about us the sea was full of floating masses of the stuff, and then suddenly one of the men cried out that there was a vessel among the weed, and that, as might be imagined, we were greatly excited, and stood upon the thwarts that we might get a better view of her. Thus I saw her a great way from the edge of the weed, and I noted that her foremast was gone near to the deck, and she had no main topmast, though, strangely enough, her mizzen stood unharmed, and beyond this I can make out little because of the distance. Through the sun, which was upon her larboard side, gave me some sight of her hull, but not much because of the weed, in which she was deeply embedded. Yet it seemed to me that her sides were very weather-worn, and in one place some glistening brown object, which may have been fungus, caught the rays of the sun sending off a wet sheen. There we stood, all of us, upon the thwart, staring and exchanging opinions, and were like to have overset the boat, but the bosun ordered us down. After this we made our breakfast and had much discussion regarding the stranger as we ate. Later, towards midday, we were able to set our mizzen, for the storm had greatly nullified, and so presently we hauled our way to the west to escape the great bank of weed which ran out from the main body. Upon rounding this, we let the boat off again and set the main lug, and thus made very good speed before the wind. Yet though we ran all the afternoon parallel with the weed to the starboard, we came not to its end, and 3 separate times we saw the hulk of rotting vessels, some of them having the appearance of our previous age, so ancient did they seem. Now, towards evening, the wind dropped to a very little breeze, so that we made but a slow way, and thus we had better chance to study the weed. Now we saw it was full of crabs, though for the most part so very minute as to escape the casual glance. Yet they were not small, for in a while I discovered a swaying among the weed, a little way from the edge, and immediately saw the mandible of such very great crab stir among the weed, and that, hoping to obtain it for food, I pointed it to the bosun, suggesting we could try and capture it. And so, there being by now a scarce of any wind, he bade us to get out a couple of the oars and back up the boat to the weed. This we did, after which he made fast piece of salt meat to a bit of spun yarn and bent this over the boat hook. Then he made a running blow line and slipped it along the loop to the shaft of the boat hook, after which he held out the boat hook, after fashioning of a fishing rod over the place where I seen the crab. Almost immediately were swept up by an enormous claw that wraps the meat. At that, the bosun cried out for me to get an oar and sliding the bowline along the boat hook so that he should fall over the claw. In this I did, and immediately summoned was hauled upon the line, taunting it with the great claw. The bosun sung out to us to haul the crab aboard, and that we had almost had it mostly securely. Yet on the instant we had risen to wish that we had been less successful, for the creature, feeling the tug of our pole upon it, tossed the weed in all directions, and thus we had a full sight of it, and discovered it be so great for a crab as it's scarce conceivable. A very monster. And apparent to us that the brute had no fear of us nor intention to escape, but rather made come to us, where the bosun, perceiving our danger, cut the line and made us put a weight upon the oars, and so in a moment we were in safety, very determined to have no more meddlings with such creatures. Presently the night came upon us, and the wind remaining low, there was everywhere about us a great stillness, most solemn after the continuous roaring of the storm that had beset us in the previous days. Yet now, again, a little wind would rise and blow across the sea, where it met the weed, there would come a low, damp rustling, so I could hear the passage of it for no little time after the calm had come once more all about us. Now the strange thing that I, who had slept amidst the noise of the passing day, should find sleeplessness among so much calm, and yet so it was. And presently I took the steering oar, proposing that the rest should sleep, and to this the bosun agreed, first warning me, however, most particularly to have care that I kept the boat off the weed, and we had still a little way on us, and further to call him should anything unforeseen occur. And after that, almost immediately, he fell asleep, as indeed did most of the men. From the time I realized that, from the time that I relieved the bosun until midnight, I sat upon the gunwale of the boat with the steering oar under my arm, and watched and listened for most full of a sense of strangeness of the seas into which we had come. It is true that I heard tales of seas choked up with weeds, seas that were full of stagnation having no tides, but I had not thought to come upon such one in my wanderings, having indeed set down such tales as being bred of imagination, without reality in fact. Then, a little before dawn, and when the sea was full of darkness, I was greatly startled to hear a prodigious splash among the weed, perhaps a distance of some 100 yards from the boat. Then, as I stood full of alertness, and knowing not what the exact moment might bring forth, there came to me across an immense waste of weed a long mournful cry, and then again silence. Yet, though I kept very quiet, there came no further sound, and I was about to reseat myself when afar off in the strange wilderness there flashed out a sudden flame of fire. Now, upon seeing the fire in the midst of so much loneliness, I was one amazed, and I could do naught but stare. When my judgment returning to me, I stooped and waked the bosun. For it seemed to me that this was a matter for his attention. He, after staring at it for a while, declared we should see the shape of a vessel's hull beyond the flame. But immediately he was in doubt, as indeed I had all while, and then, even as we peered, the light vanished, and though we waited for a space of some minutes, watching steadfastly, there came no further sight of that strange illumination. From now until dawn, the bosun remained awake with me, and we talked much upon which we had seen, yet come to no satisfactory conclusion, for it seemed impossible to us that a place of so much desolation could contain any living being. And then, just as dawn was upon us, there loomed upon a fresh wonder, the hull of a great vessel, maybe a couple or 300 square fathoms from the edge of the weed. Now the wind was still very light, being no more than occasional breath, so that we went past her at drift. Thus the dawn had strengthened sufficiently to give us clear sight of the stranger, before we had gone more than a little past her, and now I perceived that she lay full broadside onto us, and that her 3 masts were gone close down to the deck. Her side was streaked in places with rust, and others with green scum overspread her. But it was no more than a glance that I gave at any of those matters, for I spied something which drew all my attention. Great leathery arms splayed across her side, some of them crooked inward over the rail, and then, low down, just above the weed, a huge brown glistening bulk of so great a monster that I had ever conceived. The bosun saw at the same instant and cried out in a hoarse whisper that it was a mighty devilfish. And then, even as he spoke, 2 of the arms flickered up into the cold light of dawn, as though the creature had been asleep, and we had waked it. I thought the bosun ceased out an oar, and I did likewise, and swiftly as we dared, for fear of making any unneedful noise, we pulled the boat to a safer distance. From there, and until the vessel had become indistinct by reason of space we put between us, we watched as the great creature clutched onto the old hull, as it might be limping to a rock. Presently, when it was broad day, some of the men began to rouse up, and little we broke our fast, which was not displeasing to me, and was spent the night watching. And so the day we sailed with a very light wind upon our larboard side, and all the while we kept a great waste of speed upon our starboard side, and apart from the mainland of the weed, as it were. There were scattered about an uncountable number of weed inlets and banks, and there were thin patches of it appeared scarce above the water, and though these later we let the boat sail, for they had not sufficient density to impede our progress more than a little. And then, when the day was far spent, we came in sight to another wreck amid the weeds. She lay in the form of the edge perhaps so much as the half of a mile, and she had all three of her lower masts in, and her lower yards spared. But what looked to our eyes more than aught else was the great superstructure which had been built upward from her rails, almost halfway to her main tops. And this, as we were able to perceive, was supported by ropes let down from the yards. But of what material the superstructure was composed, I have no knowledge, for it was so overgrown with some form of green stuff, as much as the hull showed above the weed, as to defy our guesses. And because of this growth, it bore upon us that the ship must have been lost to the world a very great age ago. At the suggestion, I grew full of solemn thought, for it seemed to me that we had come upon the cemetery of the oceans. Now, in a little while after we passed this ancient craft, the night came down upon us, and we prepared for sleep. And because the boat was making some little way through the waters, the boatswain gave out that each of us should stand our turn at the steering oar, and that he was called should be any fresh matter transpire. And so we settled down for the night, and owing to my previous sleeplessness, I was full weary, so that I knew nothing until one whom I was to believe shook me into wakefulness. Soon, I was fully waked. I perceived that it was a low moon hung above the horizon, and shed a very ghostly light across the great weed world to the starboard. For the rest, the night was exceedingly quiet, so that no sound came to me in all that ocean, save for the rippling of the water upon our bends as the boat forged slowly along. And so I settled down to pass the time here I should allow to sleep. But first I asked the man who I had relieved how long a time had passed since moonrise, to which he replied that it was no more than half an hour, and that after I questioned him whether it aught strange amid the weed during the time at the oar, where he had seen nothing, except that once that he had fancied a light shone in the midst of the wastes, yet it could have been naught save a humor of the imagination. Though apart from this, he had heard a strange crying a little after midnight, and twice there had been great splashes among the weed, and after that he fell asleep, being impatient at my questioning. Now it so chanced that my watch had become just before the dawn, for which I was full of thankfulness, being in the frame of mind when the dark breeds strange and unwholesome fancies. Yet though I was so near to the dawn, I was not escape free of the eerie influence of that place. As I sat, running my gaze to and fro over its gray immensity, it came to me that there was strange movement among the weed, and I seemed to see vaguely, as one in many things in dreams, dim white faces peer out at me here and there. Yet my common sense assured me that I was but deceived by uncertain light and the sleep in my eyes. Yet, for all that, it seemed to put my nerves on the quiver. After a little later, came to my ears the noise of a very great splash amid the weed, but though I stared with intentness, I could not discern aught as likely to be the cause thereof. And then suddenly between me and the moon, there drove up out of the great waste a vast bulk, flinging huge masses of weed in all directions. There seemed to be no more than 100 fathoms distance against the moon, I saw the outline of it most clearly, a mighty devilfish. And then followed back once more with a prodigious splash, and so the quiet fell again, finding me sore afraid, and no little bewildered that so monstrous a creature could leap with such agility. And then, in my fright, I had let the boat come near to the edge of the weed. There came a subtle stir opposite the starboard bow, and something slid into the water. I swayed upon the oar to turn the boat's headward outward, and with the same movement leap forward and starboard appear, bringing my face near to the boat's rail. And in the same instant I found myself looking down into a white demonic face, human save for the mouse and nose had greatly appeared of a beak, and the gripping at the side of the boat with two flickering hands, ripping the bare smooth outer surface in a way that woke my mind suddenly a memory of the great devilfish which had clung to the side of the wreck we had passed in the previous dawn. I saw the face come up towards me, and one misshapen hand fluttered almost to my throat, and there came a sudden hateful reek in my nostrils, foul and abominable. Then I came into possession of my faculties, and drew back with great haste, a wild cry of fear, and then I had the steering oar by middle, and I was smiting downwards at the loom over the side of the boat, but the thing was gone from my sight. I remember shouting out to the boatswain and to the men to awake, and then the boatswain had made me by the shoulder, calling into my ear to know the dire thing that had come about. And that I cried out I did not know, and presently, being somewhat calmer, I told them of the thing that I had seen, but even as I told them of it, there seemed to be no truth in it, so that they were all at a loss to know whether I had fallen asleep, or had indeed seen a devil. And presently, the dawn was upon us. Chapter 7. The Island in the Weed. It was just as we were discussing the matter of the devil's face that appeared upon me out of the water, that Job, the ordinary seaman, discovered the island in the light of the growing dawn, and seeing it sprang to his feet with so loud a cry that for like a moment I thought he had seen the second demon. Yet when we made discovery of which he had already perceived, we checked our blame at his sudden shout, for the sight of land, after so much desolation, made us very warm in our hearts. Now at first the island seemed to be a very small matter, for we did not know at the time that we viewed it from its end. Yet despite this, we took out our oars and rowed with all haste towards it. And so, coming nearer, we were able to see that it had greater size than we had imagined. Presently, having cleared off the end of it, in keeping to that side which was further from the great mass of the weed continent, we had opened out that bay curved into a sandy beach, most seductive to our tired eyes. Here, for the space of a minute, we paused to survey the prospect, and I saw the island was of a very strange shape, having a great hump of black rock at either end, dipping down into a deep valley between them. In this valley there seemed to be a deal of strange vegetation, and there had appearingly of mighty toadstools down near to the beach. There was a thick grove of a kind of very tall reed, and these we discovered afterwards to be exceedingly tough and light, having something of the qualities of bamboo. Regarding the beach, it might have been reasonably supposed that we would be very thick with driftweed, but this was not so, at least not at the time, though projecting a horn of the black rock which ran out to the sea from the upper end of the island, it was thick with it. And now the boatswain, having assured himself there was no appearance of any danger, we bent our oars, and presently had the boat aground the beach. and here, finding it convenient, we made ourselves breakfast. During this meal, the bosun discussed with us the most proper thing to do, and decided to push that boat off from shore, leaving Job in her, whilst the remainder of us made some exploration of the island. And having so made an end of eating, and we proceeded as we determined, leaving Job in the boat, ready to scull ashore for us if we were pursued by any savage creature, while the rest of us made our way towards the nearer hump, for which, as we stood some 100 feet above the sea, we hoped to get a very good idea of the remainder of the island. First, however, the bosun handed out to us 2 cutlasses and the cotton thrust, the other 2 cutlasses being in Josh's boat, and taking one himself, he passed me the cotton thrust and gave the other cutlasses to our biggest of the men, and he bade the others to keep their sheaths nice handy, and was proceeding to lead the way, when one of them called out to us to wait a moment, and with that, ran quickly to the clump of reeds. Here he took it with us both hands and bent upon it, but he could not break it, so he had to notch it with his knife, and thus, in a little, he had it clear. After this, he cut off the upper part, which was too thin and lissom for its purpose, and then thrust the handle of his knife into the end of the portion which had remained, and in this wise he had almost serviceable lance or spear, for the reeds were very strong and hollow, after the fashion of bamboo, and he had some yarn about the end, which had thrust his knife as to prevent it from splitting, as if it was fit enough for a weapon for any man. Now, the bosun, perceiving the happiness of the fellow's idea, bade the rest to make themselves similar weapons, and whilst they were busy thus, he commended the man very warmly, and so in a little, being now most comfortably armed, we made inland towards the nearer Black Hill, in very good spirits. Presently we came to a rock which formed the hill, and found that it came up to the sand with great abruptness, so that we could not climb it on the seaward side, and that the bosun led us round to a space towards the side which lay the valley, and here, underfoot, neither sand nor rock, but ground of strange and spongy texture, and then suddenly rounding a dirter spur of the rock, we came across the first of vegetation, an incredible mushroom, I should say toadstool, for it had a healthy look about it, and gave out a heavy, moldy odor. And now we perceived that the valley was filled with them, all that is, save a great circular patch where nothing appeared to be growing, though it were not yet a sufficient height to discern the reason of this. Presently, we came to a place where the rock was split by a great fissure running up to the top, showing many ledges and convenient shelves upon which we might obtain hold and footing. And so we set about our climbing, helping one another so far as we had the ability until, in about a space of some 10 minutes, we had reached the top, and from thence a very fine view. We perceived now that there was a beach upon that side of the island which opposed to the weed, though, unlike upon that which we had landed, it was greatly choked with the weed, and which had drifted ashore. After that I gave notice to see what space of water lay between the island and the edge of the great weed continent, and guessed it to be more than maybe some 90 yards, at which I fell to wishing that it had been greater, for I was grown in awe of the weed and its strange things which I conceived it to contain. Abruptly the bosun clapped me upon the shoulder and pointed out some object that lay out through the weed at a distance of not much less than half a mile from where we stood. Now, at first, I could not conceive what matter of the thing it was which I stared until the bosun remarked at my bewilderment and informed me that it was a vessel all covered in, no doubt of its protection against the devilfish and the strange creatures in the weed, and now began to trace the hull amid the hideous growth. But of her mass I could discern nothing, and I doubted not but they had carried away by some storm ere she thought was caught by the weed, and then through. And the thought came to me at the end of those who had built up the protection against the horrors which the wee world held hidden amidst its slime. Presently I turned my gaze once more upon the island, which it was very plain to see from where we stood. I could see now, I could see much of it, that its length would be near half a mile, though its breadth was something under 400 yards. Thus, it was very long in proportion to its width, and the middle part at less than at ends, being perhaps 300 yards at its narrowest, and 100 yards wider at its broadest. On both sides of the island I had made already mention. There was a beach, though this extended no great distance along the shore, and the remainder being composed of black rock which the hills were formed. And now, having a closer regard to the beach upon the weed side of the island, I discovered amid the wreck that had been cast ashore a portion of the lower mast and topmast, some great ship with rigging attached, but all the yards were all gone. This find I pointed out to the bosun, remarking I might make proof of it for firing. But he smiled at me, telling me that the dry weed would make a very abundant fire, and this without going into the labor of putting the mast in suitable logs. And now, he, in turn, called my attention to the place where the huge fungi had come atop their growing, and I saw the center of the valley where there's a great circular opening in the earth, like the mouth of a prodigious pit, and it appeared to be filled to within a few feet of the mouth with water, over which I spread a brown horrid scum. Now, as may be supposed, I stared at that with some tetanus at this, for it had the look of being made with labor, being very symmetrical, yet could not conceive but yet I was deluded at the distance that it would have a rougher appearance than viewed from a nearer standpoint. Contemplating this, I looked down upon the little bay which our boat floated. Job was sitting in the stern, sculling gently with the steering oar, and watching us. At that, I waved my hand to him in friendly fashion, and he waved back. And then, even as I looked, I saw something in the water around the boat, something dark-colored that was all of a move, and the boat appeared to be floating over it, over a mass of sunken weed. Then I saw that, whatever it was rising to the surface, and a large piece of rock at the bosun's hail. The lad called out, standing up, gave a sweet, else he had never come into it for in his life. The next moment, the moving brown mass beneath the bow shot out a great technical tented over the starboard gunwale of the boat. The oar itself was drawn down out of sight, and for a minute the boat was now the bosun cried out to the boy to get another oar and get to shore while he had still the chance, and that we all called it various things, one advising one thing and another recommending some other. Yet our advice was in vain, for the boy moved not, at which some cried out that he was stunned. I looked now to where the brown thing had been, for the boat had moved a few fathoms from the spot, having got some way upon her before the oar was snatched, and thus I discovered that the monster had disappeared, having had risen, yet might reappear at any moment. In that case the boy would be taken before our eyes. At this junction, the bosun called to us to follow him, and led the way to the great fissure up which we had climbed, and so in a minute we were each of us scrambling down with haste that we could make towards the valley. And all this while, as I dropped ledge to ledge, I was in full torment to know whether the monster had returned. The bosun was the first man to reach the bottom of the cleft, and set off immediately round the base of the rock to the beach. the rest of us following him as we made our safe footing into the valley. I was third man down, but being light and fleet of foot, I passed the second man and caught up with the bosun just as he came upon the sand. Here I found the boat was within 5 fathoms of the beach, and I could see Job still laying insensible. But of the monster, there was no sign. And so the matters were. The boat nearly a dozen yards from shore, and Job laying insensibly in her, with someone near under her keel, for all we knew a great monster, and we helpless upon the beach. Now I could imagine how to save the lad, and indeed I feared to be left to destruction, for I had reached the boat by swimming, but the extraordinary bravery of the bosun, with who, hesitating, dashed into the water and swam boldly out to the boat, which by the grace of God he reached without mishap, and climbed in over the bows. Immediately he took the painter and hove it into us, bidding us to tail onto it and bring the boat to shore without delay. And by this method of gaining the beach he showed wisdom, for in this wise he escaped attracting the attention of the monster by a needful stirring of the water, and he would surely have done as he had made use of an oar. Yet despite his care, we have not finished with the creature, for just as the boat grounded, I lost steering oar shot up at the length out at sea, and immediately there was a mighty splather in the water astern, and in an instant the air seemed full of huge whirling arms, and that the bosun gave one look behind, and seeing the thing upon him, snatched the boy into his arms and sprang over the bows onto the sand. Now at sight of the devilfish we had made for the back of the beach at run, none troubling even to attain the painter. Because of this we were likely to have lost the boat, for a great cuttlefish had its arms all splayed about it, seeming to a mind to drag it down in the deep of the water whence it had risen, and had possibly succeeded. But the bosun brought us all to our senses, having laid Job out of harm's way. He was the first to seize the painter, which lay trailed upon the sand, and at that we got back our courage and ran to assist him. Now there happened to be a convenient great spike of rock, the same indeed to which the bosun had bidden Job to tide the boat, and to this we ran the painter, taking a couple of turns about 2.5 hitches, and now, unless the rope carried away, we had no reason to fear the loss of the boat, though there seemed to us the danger of the creature's crushing it. Because of this, and because of the feeling of the natural anger against the thing, the bosun took up from the sand one of the spears which had been cast down when we hauled the boat ashore. With this he went down so far as seemed safe and prodded the creature with one of its tentacles, where the weapon entered easily, at which I surprised, for I understood that these monsters were near to invulnerable in all parts save the eyes. After seizing the stab, the great fish appeared to feel no hurt, for it showed no signs of pain, and at that the bosun was further emboldened to go nearer, so that he might deliver a more deadly. Had he taken 2 steps before the hideous thing was upon him, and but for an agility wonderful in so great a man, he had been destroyed. Yet in spite of so narrow an escape from death, he was no less determined to wound or destroy the creature, and to this end he dispatched some of us to the grove of reeds to get a half-dozen of the strongest, and with these he bade 2 others securely to them, and by this means he now had spears of length of between 30 and 40 feet. With these it was possible to attack the devilfish without coming within reach of its tentacles. And now, being ready, he took one of the spears, telling the biggest of the men to take the other. Then he directed him to aim at the right eye of the huge fish, whilst he would attack the left. Now, since the creature had so nearly captured the bosun, it would cease to tug at the boat and lay silent with its tentacles spread about it. its great eyes appearing just over the stern, so that presented an appearance of watching our movements, though I doubt if it saw us of any clearness, for it must have been dazed with the brightness of the sunshine. And now the bosun gave the signal to attack, at which he and the man ran downward upon the creature with their lances, as it were, in rest. The bosun's spear took the monster truly in its left eye, but the one wielded by the man was too bendable, and saying so much it struck the stern post of the boat, the knife blade snapping off short. Yet it mattered not, for the wound inflicted by the bosun's weapon was so frightful that the giant cuttlefish released the boat and slid back deep into the water, churning into foam and gouting blood. For the minutes we waited to make sure the monster had indeed gone. After that, we hastened to the boat and drew her up so far as we were able, after which we had noted the heaviest of her contents and were able to get her right clear of the water. And for an hour afterwards, the sea all about the beach was stained black and in places red. Thank you very, very much for joining tonight. Sorry about that. But anyway, I'm back again tomorrow, and we'll be starting with Chapter 8. Anyway, take care. Rest well.